The next day the time for classes arrived, and all the students went to the academy. Professor Vinci Morgue was somewhat angry. Next to the professor there was a table on which lay the corpse of a giant scorpion known as Venompion. He crossed his arms and asked who had written the report. Vicar, who was holding a notebook with one hand, got on stage indicating that he was the one who had written the report. According to Vicar's report, the Venompion had a second stinger that no one had discovered in scorpion venom. The professor thought this was some kind of joke, so he threatened him that if the information was false, he would deduct 10 points from all members of Ice Corps. Vicar had come in first place in the written evaluation, and the teacher asked him if he understood what he wanted to say. Vicar, who was holding the red notebook with one hand, started to sweat and became somewhat confused and thought that it had been a mistake to reveal this. He could not believe that this information had still not been discovered in this era. Vinci Morgue took out a scalpel, approached the corpse of the giant scorpion, began to observe it, and with a smile decided to check if there really was a second stinger hidden in the shell of the torso. He approached with precision the scalpel to the belly of the scorpion, and instead of making a clean cut, he drove the scalpel hard, causing the blood to come out to the outside. At that moment, something sharp shot out from the belly of the scorpion towards the professor, causing him to drop the scalpel and take several steps back. All the students who were present in the room were left speechless and in shock at the same time. The reality was that Vicar's report was correct, as the scorpion really had a second stinger. The stinger, which was full of venom, stood right in front of the professor's face. He swallowed saliva, started to look at it, and couldn't help but become terrified and start sweating. With the stinger so close, the professor fell on his back against the ground, gritted his teeth, and began to feel fear. Just before the stinger could have pierced the professor, Vicar had appeared, and using the red notebook, he had stopped the stinger. He began to observe the venom and asked Vinci Morgue if this had demonstrated the authenticity of his report. Vinci Morgue was perplexed and started to sweat like never before. He was unable to believe that there really was a second stinger, nor how a simple student knew about the Venompions and had made a great discovery that solved the mysterious cases of death. Now that Vicar's report was correct, he decided to award 1 point to all the students of the Ice Corps. As for Vicar, the professor asked him to come to the laboratory after class for a more detailed explanation about this report. He kept calm and with a quiet voice responded with an understood. All the students were shocked. They could not believe that a student like him had made such a discovery. The professor, who still did not believe this, approached the table again and began inspecting the stinger. Vicar got off the stage, turned his back on the professor, and started climbing up the stairs to reach his table. Everyone's gaze was fixed on our boy. They didn't know how he had been able to do such research. Everyone thought he was good at sports, but no one expected that he would also be good in studies. He was impressive since in the last swimming competition he had even competed against Tudor and Sancho. Vicar reached his seat and using his hand moved his chair back to sit down. Piggy began to look at him and couldn't help but start smiling and feeling happy seeing that he had succeeded. As the rays of sunlight were entering the classroom, with a lost look, Vicar began to stare at the ground. According to the students, that face hidden behind glasses and his hair was incredible. At first, Vicar remained watching in silence, but then he closed his eyes and began to remember the explosion from yesterday. The explosion from the day before was so powerful that it destroyed most of the orphanage until turning everything into ashes. It had been so powerful that it even affected Vicar, who had lost an arm, his face, and many muscles in his body. But this was no problem for him, since using regeneration, he began to slowly heal his body. Once his body healed completely, he put his hands in front to protect himself from any other possible attack. He was in shock as he couldn't believe that the explosion had been so powerful. Back to the present, he opened his eyes and started thinking about Afibo. Just before the explosion, that bastard had disappeared. The only thing he had obtained was the accounting book from the director's safe of the orphanage. The orphanage was located in the middle of the city. One of the books he had found contained information on the whereabouts of children who had been used as food for demons. Since there was no connection to that place, it was also possible that there were multiple 10 elite corpses in the Imperial Palace. In the middle of the moonlight, a man climbed onto the roof of a house. This man was wearing the academy uniform, and he had been responsible for blowing up the body of the orphanage director. He couldn't help but start to smile and thought that he had finished with the night Hound. Back to the present, Vicar's eyes filled with appetite, and he began to observe carefully the other students. In the class there was a demonic presence, and there was a possibility that there could be one of the 10 elite corpses. The academy had a newspaper that was famous even in the imperial capital. Its influence was enormous. Newspapers published daily always sold like hotcakes. There wasn't a single student who didn't buy the newspaper. At the same time, in the journalism club of the Academy Ryukan, a woman began to look at the ground. She was none other than Dolores Runquavades, a third-year student and president of Ryukan. She tightly clenched her fist, extended the other hand to one side, and with an exciting look welcomed everyone to Ryukan. The journalism club filled with students, Dolores placed her hands on her hips and started to show a smile. They had joined Ryukan, which had a reputation for being tough, demonstrating how persistent they were. She decided to start with the introductions. Tutor La Mancha Don Quixote, first-year student of the academy, joined the club. He clenched his fist and with a smile mentioned that in academic work and in the club he planned to become an elite that did everything well. Sancho Baratria also joined the club. With a determined look, he mentioned that he didn't want people to think that he was simply a strong idiot. He had joined the journalism club to become an intelligent man. Sinclair also joined the club. She started pointing upwards with her finger and with a cheerful smile explained that she had joined the club thinking that the information here was superior. Bianca Pousher also joined the club. Among the clubs, she had chosen the one that had more vision for the future. She was going to do her best. Piggy was nervous as a tomato. He closed his eyes, started sweating like crazy. From the beginning he had liked collecting and analyzing information. He believed that the journalism club was his vocation. Victor kept calm and explained that he had heard it was a school rule to join the club, so for this reason, he had decided to follow Piggy. His eyes were showing that he had other plans. Ryukan was a journalism club that was famous both inside and outside the academy. If he stayed here, he would be able to obtain a lot of important information. Although it was a bit uncomfortable because the saint was here, he had no other option. Dolores, who had her hands on her hips, approached Victor, and with a serious look explained that he could not become a reporter for Ryukan with that kind of unenthusiastic attitude. The girl who was next to her and had her hand under her chin looked somewhat surprised to see Victor. She took out a newspaper, pushed the saintess aside, stood in front of Victor, and she couldn't help but start to smile since she couldn't believe that such a famous person as him would come to their club, leaving the saintess in shock. The photograph of Victor drying his sweat after the match became so famous that he even appeared in newspapers, being named Facial Genius. Tudor started pointing at the newspaper with his finger, turned his head towards him, closed his eyes and began to laugh at Victor, who simply remained silent without saying a word. Dolores started to look at the girl with a confused look and asked when an article like this had come out. This girl was named Anna and she was a third-year student, vice principal of Ryukan. She started to laugh and mentioned that she had received a report about a new handsome student. If she didn't publish it, she couldn't consider herself a reporter. Dolores put her hand over her face and she began to feel somewhat disappointed. Anna placed one hand on her hip, extended the other to the side, and all the students who had joined the club formed a horizontal line. Due to the fact that all the other second and third year students had gone to do reports, Anna decided to start activities with the people who were here today. X day X month, early in the morning, an incident occurs where a mysterious stranger appeared and destroyed the orphanage. Everyone sat at a table and began reading the reports. Piggy asked if this was the explosion that had occurred yesterday, to which Dolores replied yes. On the day of the incident she had left the academy and had made some reports. With a calm look, Anna explained that they assumed the culprit in this case was the same as the culprit of the recent murder case in the imperial capital. What was shocking was that many children's corpses had been found in this orphanage. Piggy, who was holding the report with both hands, started to look at her and he couldn't help but start sweating and being somewhat shocked. He brought his hand to his mouth, began to whisper, and asked Victor, who was sitting next to him, if this was also the work of a monster. Victor, who was holding a report, began to observe it and thought that the bodies of the boy and the girl were the work of the demon. Anna intertwined her hands, rested her elbows on the table, and with a smile thought that everyone should decide the headline of this article. Dolores began to read the report and she started to feel sad. Everyone took some pens and began to write headlines for the article. Bianca took the report with both hands since she couldn't find anything that caught her attention. Tudor, who was sitting in front of her, put his hand under his chin and with an uncertain look asked why they still didn't have the name of the villain. The ruthless criminals received nicknames like Butcher of Humans and Bluebeard. Anna thought Tudor's opinion was good. Upon hearing this, he got very excited and suggested the name Master Dark of the Sword. But she said that this name was the worst, making poor Tudor depressed. He started to imagine several villains and first suggested the name Bomber, who brings misfortune. But according to Anna, it was too long. Then, Tutor suggested the name Orphanage Killer and Mr. Terrorist. While everyone was talking, Dolores began to quietly write a report. Several seconds later, she opened her mouth saying the name of the Night Hound. She started to remember Victor's mask. The mask that she had picked up at the scene clearly belonged to the Night Hound. She didn't know why it was there. Humility that did not boast of prestige or wealth. He had also treated his neighbors in the marginalized neighborhoods who suffered from Red Death with sincerity. That love and devotion towards the less fortunate was real. For this reason, she had thought that stealing the tears of the saint was a great cause. With a sad look, she began to wonder why he had been at the place of the disaster yesterday. Now she doubted if he had killed the director of the orphanage and the children. With a lost look, she began to gaze at the ground. Her eyes had not deceived her. He was not a villain. If the culprit was Night Hound, then it was possible that something was happening. While she was lost in her thoughts, someone asked if Night Hound was good. Upon hearing this, she came out of her trance and with a surprised look began to wonder what was happening. With a cheerful smile, everyone started to watch Dolores. Night Hound was a nomenclature of barbaric style, so the violence was clearly revealed. It was something gloomy that produced fear. Sinclair raised her hand and with a smile decided to name the villain as Night Hound. Dolores began to blush. Quickly she covered her mouth. The reality was that she had murmured the name of Night Hound. Anna asked her opinion about this headline, the villain who brought fear to the imperial capital Night Hound. She refused, saying that the Rukan article should contain only facts. There was still no information that he was the culprit. Tutor, who was sitting next to Victor, turned to him and with a serene look asked what he thought about this. Victor, who had both hands resting on the table, asked what he meant by this. Tutor wanted to know if Victor believed that the Night Hound was a villain or not. He started looking at Tutor and explained that he had no idea. No one would have thought that the words Night Hound would come out of the saint's mouth. Tutor approached him, put his arm around his neck, rested the other hand on his shoulder, closed his eyes and started to laugh. He wanted to know Victor's opinion. At first, he felt somewhat annoyed, but then he began to look at the ground and remained thinking in silence. He opened his mouth and mentioned that the truth was that he was not a good person, so he must be a villain. This was the same opinion Tutor had, but at that moment, someone hit the table hard, leaving Tutor and Victor in shock. This person was none other than Dolores. She began to stare at Victor and asked if the Night Hound really wasn't a good person. With an angry look, she asked them how they were so sure of this. Tutor removed his hand from Victor's shoulder and started to sweat. Upon hearing Dolores' words, Victor couldn't help but feel somewhat surprised. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.